All right, let me start with a situation most sports bettors have experienced. You're watching a game with friends, you're checking your online app, you're scrolling through Twitter, and everywhere that you look, everyone seems to be on that same team. Your friends like the favorite, the analysts like the favorite, the betting percentages show about 80 to 85% of the bets on that side, and naturally the question becomes if everyone is betting the same team, should you be betting it too? Well, in sports betting, situations like that are exactly where something called contrarian betting comes into play. Today, we're going to break down what being a contrarian actually means, why it exists in the betting markets, and how bettors use it to identify potential value. Now, to understand the concept, we need to understand something very important about sports betting markets. The public drives sports betting markets. So, the vast majority of bets placed on games come from recreational bettors, meaning casual fans placing tickets for entertainment. And those bets tend to follow very predictable patterns. Most people bet popular teams, they bet based on recent results, and they bet based on the narratives that they hear from the media or even some social media. When thousands of bettors start to pile onto the same side, it creates an imbalanced betting percentage. For example, you might see a game where 85% of the tickets are on one team, leaving only 15% on the other. And when that happens, sportsbooks don't just sit there. They adjust the line to account for the action. And that exact situation is where contrarian betting starts to become interesting. But before we get into how bettors use that information, let's first define exactly what contrarian betting actually is. So now that we understand how public betting creates these imbalanced markets, let's define what contrarian betting actually is. So contrarian betting simply means betting against the majority of bettors. So instead of following the crowd, a contrarian bettor intentionally looks for the side that fewer people are betting on. In other words, they're taking the team with the low betting percentages. And the goal is to exploit something called that public bias. Because remember, most recreational bettors are not making decisions based on deep analysis. They're often betting based on popularity, recent performances, or those media narratives that we talked about. And then when thousands of bettors all start piling onto that same team, those betting percentages can become extremely one sided. So, for example, you might see a game where 70%, 80%, or even 90% of tickets are on one side, leaving the other team with about 30% or less of the bets. That's the type of situation contrarian bettors pay attention to. And the simple rule behind the strategy is this: if the public piles onto one side, the value may actually be on the other. Now that we understand the basic definition, the next question becomes where do contrarian opportunities usually show up in the betting market? And if you enjoy these type of videos breaking down how betting markets actually work, make sure you hit the like button. It really helps this channel reach more bettors like yourself. So now that we understand what contrarian betting is, the next question becomes where do these opportunities usually show up? Now, the first one or the main one is going to be classic contrarian setups. These tend to appear in games with heavy betting volume. So, as a general rule, I like to look for games with at least 5,000 bets or more because that's going to tell us that the public is heavily involved in the market. Now, these situations are most common in nationally televised games, high profile games, and especially playoff games where casual bettors are paying the most attention. Now, the more public interest there is in one game, the more likely it is that betting percentages become skewed to one side. And that's when the classic contrarian philosophy comes into play. So, if everyone is on one side, you at least want to look at the other. For example, take a look at the betting split that we have here. In this matchup, 85% of tickets are on Iowa, while only 15% of bets are on Nebraska. And the total number of bets are well over that 5,000 threshold that we showed you all the way down at the bottom to the far right hand when it comes to the bets column. Now, that's the exact type of situation contrarian bettors are paying attention to. It doesn't automatically mean Nebraska is the right bet, but it's basically a signal that the public is heavily leaning in one direction. And that's where a contrarian bettor might start investigating the other side. So now the next thing we need to talk about is an important distinction because contrarian betting and sharp betting are not necessarily the same thing. And I'm curious, when you see betting splits like this, do you usually follow the majority side or do you look on that contrarian side? Please let us know down in the comments down below. All right, so now before going any further, it's going to be important to clear up a very common misunderstanding in sports betting. Contrarian betting is not the same thing as sharp betting. What do we mean here? Well, contrarian betting is simply means fading the public. You're identifying situations where the majority of bettors are on one side and you're investigating the other side, right? We've talked about this throughout the whole presentation. But let's move over to the sharp betting side. This refers to professional bettors placing large or influential wagers that move the market or move, the number. So while contrarian betting focuses on bet percentages, sharp betting is often identified through that line movement. For example, if a team is only getting a small percentage of bets, that suggests that the public is fading that team. But if the betting line starts moving toward that same team anyway, that can signal something very interesting, that professional bettors or sharp money may be coming in on that side. So, the best situation that many bettors are looking for is when these two things happen at the same time. A team is getting low betting percentages, meaning the public is mostly betting the other side, but the line is still moving toward that unpopular team. So when those two things line up, it can suggest that the contrarian betting and sharp money may be pointing in the same direction. We call that being a sharp contrarian. And when that happens, it's definitely a situation worth taking a closer look at. Now, let's talk about how I personally use contrarian signals and when analyzing my own matchups. And if you enjoy learning about betting concepts like this, make sure to subscribe to Grandstand Sports Data because we break down sports betting strategy and market analysis almost better than anybody that we know. Now, the way I personally use contrarian betting is a little different than how it's basically talked about online or in, basically in your face everywhere that you go. I don't treat contrarian betting as a standalone strategy. Instead, I treat it as a filter, something that helps me identify games that might be worth investigating further. Now, here's what that process typically looks like. First, I start by identifying public games. These are the games with heavy betting volume. We talked about this earlier, right? Usually that 5,000 tickets or more threshold because that tells me the public is heavily involved in that market. Next, I'm going to start checking the bet percentages. I'm looking to see if one team is getting less than about 30% of the tickets, which would indicate that the public is heavily leaning toward that other side. After that, I start taking a look at the line movement. Is the line moving toward the heavily bet side, or is it moving toward the team that very few people are betting on? Then I start to compare that information with my own analysis, whether that's matchup research, statistical models, or a combo of the two. Then, basically how my research process is and how I evaluate games. And then finally, I determine whether there's an actual value in that final number. So again, contrarian signals don't automatically tell you what to bet. What they do is help you find games that deserve that closer look or increase your bet stake for a particular bet. And that's really important distinction for bettors to understand. So let's wrap everything up with a few key takeaways here. At its core, being a contrarian means betting against the majority of bettors by using betting splits as a signal to identify potential public bias and inflated lines. But the most important thing to remember is this: contrarian betting is a tool and not a complete betting system by itself. It's simply just one way to help you identify games where the market might be leaning too heavily in one direction. Now, contrarian betting tends to work best in situations where the public is most involved in the betting market. That usually means these primetime games, playoff matchups, and games involving big public teams. It also shows up more often in heavily bet sports like the NFL, NBA, and also those big conferences in college football. But generally speaking, it usually works in any game that has 5,000 bets or more. This usually has enough public action for contrarian signals to start appearing. I say the 5,000 bet threshold because certain events like NHL playoffs, major tennis matches, or other high profile matches can occasionally cross that mark and then suddenly become popular betting events for the public. You do also have to consider some of the bet types. So, for example, in the NBA, games might reach 5,000 bets on the spread, but they don't on the money line. Whereas in the MLB, they do on the money line and they don't necessarily on the spread or run line. Also, for my prop bettors out there, It's going to be a tad bit harder to gauge whether a specific prop has reached 5,000. I know I personally use the Action Network, which does give some betting volume data. Some props may qualify and hit those 5,000, while most do not. But I'm going to say this never changes the handicapping process. That always comes first. That still has to be your priority. However, I will say these sports typically don't attract heavy public money during the regular season. So those props, NHL, some of those small market sports. So for some of the bettors who are targeting those low hanging fruit sports, be careful with your analysis once playoffs begin because those markets can quickly turn into those public markets because more people start to bet, right? Now let's look at the other side. It's equally important to understand when contrarian betting doesn't work, right? Sometimes you have to understand the public is right, and sometimes the favorite really is the better team, and sometimes the market has already adjusted the line to account for the betting action. So the most important rule to remember is this: being contrarian is only a signal, ladies and gentlemen. It's not necessarily a strategy by itself. It's a way to identify potential opportunities, but it should always be combined with your own analysis and research before placing a bet. So that's the quick breakdown of what contrarian betting is and how bettors use it to analyze betting markets. Remember, the goal isn't just to blindly fade the public. It's to recognize when public betting may be influencing the line and then use that information as part of your overall analysis. So if you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe for more sports betting education. And let me know in the comments down below, do you ever fade the public when betting? Thank you guys for watching Grandstand Sports Data, and we'll see you in the next one.